I detected in the questions posed by your team a desire to isolate some rationale that would explain why racism exists at the prison with particular prominence. Of course the subject was really too large to be dealt with in one tour and in the short time they allowed you, but it was a brave scene. My small but mighty mouthpiece, and the black establishment senator and his team, invading the state's maximum security row in the worst of its concentration camps. I think you were the first woman to be allowed to inspect these facilities. Thanks from all. The question was too large, however. It's tied into the question of why all these California prisons vary in character and flavor in general. It's tied into the larger question of why racism exists in this whole society with particular prominence, tied into history. Out of it comes another question. Why do California joints produce more Bunchy Carters and Eldridge Cleavers than those over the rest of the country? I understand your attempt to isolate the set of localized circumstances that give to this particular prison's problems of race is based on a desire to aid us right now, in the present crisis. There are some changes that could be made right now that would alleviate some of the pressures inside this and other prisons. But to get at the causes, one would be forced to deal with questions at the very center of American political and economic life, at the core of the American historical experience. This prison didn't come to exist where it does just by happenstance. Those who inhabit it and feed off its existence are historical products. The great majority of Soledad pigs are southern migrants who do not want to work in the fields and farms of the area, who couldn't sell cars or insurance, and who couldn't tolerate the discipline of the army. And of course prisons attract sadists. After one concedes that racism is stamped unalterably into the present nature of American socio-political and economic life in general, the definition of fascism is a police state wherein the political ascendancy is tied into and protects the interests of the upper class, characterized by militarism, racism, and imperialism, and concedes further that criminals and crime arise from material, economic, socio-political causes. We can then burn all of the criminology and penology libraries and direct our attention where it will do some good. The logical place to begin any investigation into the problems of California prisons is with our pigs are beautiful Governor Reagan, radical reformer turned reactionary. For a real understanding of the failure of prison policies, it is senseless to continue to study the criminal. All of those who can afford to be honest know that the real victim, that poor, uneducated, disorganized man who finds himself a convicted criminal, is simply the end result of a long chain of corruption and mismanagement that starts with people like Reagan and his political appointees in Sacramento. After one investigates Reagan's character, what makes a turncoat, the next logical step in the inquiry would be a look into the biggest political prize of the state, the directorship of the Department of Correction. All other lines of inquiry would be like walking backward. You'll never see where you're going. You must begin with directors, assistant directors, adult authority boards, roving boards, supervisors, wardens, captains, and guards. You have to examine these people from director down to guard before you can logically examine their product. Add to this some concrete and steel, barbed wire, rifles, pistols, clubs, the tear gas that killed Brother Billingsley in San Quentin in February 1970, while he was locked in his cell, and the pick handles of Folsom, San Quentin, and Soledad. To determine how men will behave once they enter the prison, it is of first importance to know that prison men are brutalized by their environment, not the reverse. I gave you a good example of this when I saw you last. Where I am presently being held, they never allow us to leave our cell without first handcuffing us and belting or chaining the cuffs to our waists. This is preceded always by a very thorough skin search. A force of a dozen or more pigs can be expected to invade the row at any time, searching and destroying personal effects. The attitude of the staff toward the convicts is both defensive and hostile. Until the convict gives in completely, it will continue to be so. By giving in, I mean prostrating oneself at their feet. Only then does their attitude alter itself to one of paternalistic condescension. Most convicts don't dig this kind of relationship, though there are some who do love it, with a group of individuals demonstrably inferior to the rest of the society in regard to education, culture, and sensitivity. Our cells are so far from the regular dining area that our food is always cold before we get it. Some days there is only one meal that can be called cooked. We never get anything but cold-cut sandwiches for lunch. There is no variety to the menu. The same things week after week. One is confined to his cell 23.5 hours a day. Overt racism exists unchecked. It is not a case of the pigs trying to stop the many racist attacks, they actively encourage them. They are fighting upstairs right now. It's 11:10 a.m., June 11th. No black is supposed to be on the tier upstairs with anyone but other blacks, but Mistakes take place, and one or two blacks end up on the tier with 9 or 10 white convicts frustrated by the living conditions or openly working with the pigs. The whole ceiling is trembling. In hand-to-hand combat we always win, we lose sometimes if the pigs give them knives or zip guns. Lunch will be delayed today, the tear gas or whatever it is drifts down to sting my nose and eyes. Someone is hurt bad. I hear the meat wagon from the hospital being brought up. Pigs probably gave them some weapons. But I must be fair. Sometimes, not more often than necessary, they'll set up one of the Mexican or white convicts. He'll be one who has not been sufficiently racist in his attitudes. After the brothers, enraged by previous attacks, kick on this white convict whom the officials have set up, he'll fall right into line with the rest. I was saying that the great majority of the people who live in this area of the state and seek their employment from this institution have overt racism as a traditional aspect of their characters. The only stops that regulate how far they will carry this thing come from the fear of losing employment here as a result of the outside pressures to control the violence. That is wing, max, maximum security, Soledad, in part anyway. Take an individual who has been in the general prison population for a time. Picture him as an average convict with the average 12-year-old mentality, the nation's norm. He wants out, he wants a woman and a beer. Let's say this average convict is white and has just been caught attempting to escape. They may put him on max row. This is the worst thing that will ever happen to him. In the general population facility there are no chains and cuffs. TVs, radios, record players, civilian sweaters, keys to his own cell for daytime use, serve to keep his mind off his real problems. There is also a recreation yard with all sorts of balls and instruments to strike or thrust at. There is a gym. There are movies and a library well stocked with light fiction. And of course there is work, where for 2 or 3 cents an hour convicts here at Soledad make paper products, furniture, and clothing. Some people actually like this work since it does provide some money for the small things and helps them to get through their day, without thinking about their real problems. Take an innocent con out of this general population setting, because a pig thought he may have seen him attempting a lock. Bring him to any part of a wing, the worst part of the adjustment center of which Max Rowe is a part. He will be cuffed, chained, belted, pressured by the police who think that every convict should be an informer. He will be pressured by the white cons to join their racist brand of politics. They all go under the nickname Hitler's helpers. If he is predisposed to help black he will be pushed away, by black. 3 weeks is enough. The strongest hold out no more than a couple of weeks. There has been one white man only to go through this wing experience without losing his balance, without allowing himself to succumb to the madness of ribald, protrusive racism. It destroys the logical processes of the mind, a man's thoughts become completely disorganized. The noise, madness streaming from every throat, frustrated sounds from the bars, metallic sounds from the walls, the steel trays, the iron beds bolted to the wall, the hollow sounds from a cast iron sink or toilet. The smells, the human waste thrown at us, unwashed bodies, the rotten food. When a white con leaves here he's ruined for life. No black leaves Max Rowe walking. Either he leaves on the meat wagon or he leaves crawling licking at the pig's feet. Ironic, because one cannot get a parole to the outside prison directly from wing, Max Rowe. It's positively not done. The parole board won't even consider the Max Rowe case. So a man licks at the feet of the pig not for a release to the outside world but for the privilege of going upstairs to a wing adjustment center. There the licking process must continue if a parole is the object. You can count on one hand the number of people who have been paroled to the streets from wing proper in all the years that the prison has existed. No one goes from wing, Max Rowe straight to the general prison population. To go from here to the outside world is unthinkable. A man must go from Max Rowe to the regular adjustment center facility upstairs. Then from there to the general prison population. Only then can he entertain thoughts of eventual release to the outside world. One can understand the depression felt by an inmate on Max Rowe. He's fallen as far as he can into the social trap, relief is so distant that it's very easy for him to lose his holds. In 2 weeks that little average man who may have ended up on Max Rowe for suspicion of attempted escape is so brutalized, so completely without holds, that he will never heal again. It's worse than Vietnam. He's dodging lead. He may be forced to fight a duel to the death with knives. If he doesn't sound and act more zealous than everyone else he will be challenged for not being loyal to his race and its politics, fascism. Some of these cons support the pig's racism without shame, the others support it inadvertently by their own racism. The former are white, the latter black. But in here as on the street black racism is a forced reaction. A survival adaptation. The picture that I have painted of Soledad's general population facility may have made it sound not too bad at all. That mistaken impression would result from the absence in my description of one more very important feature of the main line: terrorism. A frightening, petrifying diffusion of violence and intimidation is emitted from the offices of the warden and captain. How else could a small group of armed men be expected to hold and rule another much larger group except through fear? We have a gym, inducement to throw away our energies with a ball instead of revolution. But if you walk into this gym with a cigarette burning, you're probably in trouble. There is a pig waiting to trap you. There's a sign "No smoking." If you miss the sign, trouble. If you drop the cigarette to comply, trouble. The floor is regarded as something of a fire hazard. I'm not certain what the pretext is. There are no receptacles. The pig will pounce. You'll be told in no uncertain terms to scrape the cigarette from the floor with your hands. It builds from there. You have a gym, but only certain things may be done and in specified ways. Since the rules change with the pig's mood, it is really safer for a man to stay in his cell. You have worked with emoluments that range from nothing to 3 cents an hour. But once you accept the pay job in the prison's industrial sector, you cannot get out without going through the bad conduct process. When workers are needed, it isn't a case of accepting a job in this area. You take the job or you're automatically refusing to work, even if you clearly stated that you would cooperate in other employment. The same atmosphere prevails on the recreation yard, where any type of minor mistake could result not in merely a bad conduct report and placement in adjustment center, but death. A fistfight, a temporary, trivial loss of temper will bring a fusillade of bullets down on the darker of the two men fighting. You can't begin to measure the bad feeling caused by the existence of one TV set shared by 140 men. Think. One TV, 140 men. If there is more than one channel, what's going to occur? In Soledad's TV rooms there has been murder, mayhem, and destruction of many TV sets. The blacks occupy one side of the room and the whites and Mexicans the other. Isn't it significant in some way that our numbers in prison are sufficient to justify the claiming of half of all these facilities? We have a side, they have a side. What does your imagination envisage out of a hypothetical situation where Nina Simone sings, Angela Davis speaks, and Jim Brown splits on one channel, while Merle Haggard yodels and begs for an ass-kicking on another? The fight will follow immediately after some brother, who is less democratic than he is starved for beauty, "We did vote but they're 60 to our 40, turns the station to see Angela Davis. What lines do you think the fighting will be along? Won't it be Angela and me against Merle Haggard? But this situation is tolerable, at least up to a point. It was worse. When I entered the joint on this offense, they had half and we had half, but out half was in the back. In a case like the one just mentioned, the white convicts will start passing the word among themselves that all whites should be in the TV room to vote in the Cadillac Cowboy. The two groups polarize out of a situation created by whom? It's just like the outside. Nothing at all complicated about it. When people walk on each other, when disharmony is the norm, when organisms start falling apart, it is the fault of these whose responsibility it is to govern. They're doing something wrong. They shouldn't have been trusted with the responsibility. And long-range political activity isn't going to help that man who will die tomorrow or tonight. The apologists recognize that these places are controlled by absolute terror, but they justify the pig's excesses with the argument that we exist outside the practice of any civilized codes of conduct. Since we are convicts rather than men, a bullet through the heat, summary execution for fist-fighting or stepping across a line is not extreme or unsound at all. An official is allowed full range in violent means because a convict can be handled no other way. Faye, have you ever considered what type of man is capable of handling absolute power? I mean, how many would not abuse it? Is there any way of isolating or classifying generally who can be trusted with a gun and absolute discretion as to who he will kill? I've already mentioned that most of them are KKK types. The rest, all the rest, in general, are so stupid that they shouldn't be allowed to run their own bath. A responsible state government would have found a means of weeding out most of the savage types that are drawn to gunslinger jobs long ago. How did all these pigs get through? Men who can barely read, write, or reason. How did they get through? You may as well give a baboon a gun and set him loose on us. It's the same in here as on the streets out there. Who has loosed this thing on an already suffering people? The Reagans, Nixons, the men who have, who own. Investigate them. There are no qualifications asked, no experience necessary. Any fool who falls in here and can sign his name might shoot me tomorrow from a position 30 feet above my head with an automatic military rifle. He could be dead drunk. It could really be an accident, 1,000,000 to 1 it won't be, however, but he'll be protected still. He won't even miss a day's wages. The textbooks on criminology like to advance the idea that prisoners are mentally defective. There is only the merest suggestion that the system itself is at fault. Penologists regard prisons as asylums. Most policy is formulated in a bureau that operates under the heading Department of Corrections. But what can we say about these asylums since none of the inmates are ever cured? Since in every instance they are sent out of the prison more damaged physically and mentally than when they entered. Because that is the reality. Do you continue to investigate the inmate? Where does administrative responsibility begin? Perhaps the administration of the prison cannot be held accountable for every individual act of their charges, but when things fly apart along racial lines, when the breakdown can be traced so clearly to circumstances even beyond the control of the guards and administration, investigation of anything outside the tenets of the fascist system itself is futile. Nothing has improved, nothing has changed in the weeks since your team was here. We're on the same course. The blacks are fast losing the last of their restraints. Growing numbers of blacks are openly passed over when paroles are considered. They have become aware that their only hope lies in resistance. They have learned that resistance is actually possible. The holds are beginning to slip away. Very few men in prison for economic crimes or even crimes of passion against the oppressor feel that they are really guilty. Most of today's black convicts have come to understand that they are the most abused victims of an unrighteous order. Up until now, the prospect of parole has kept us from confronting our captors with any real determination. But now with the living conditions of these places deteriorating, and with the sure knowledge that we are slated for destruction, we have been transformed into an implacable army of liberation. The shift to the revolutionary anti-establishment position that Huey Newton, Eldridge Cleaver, and Bobby Seale projected as a solution to the problems of America's black colonies has taken firm hold of these brothers' minds. They are now showing great interest in the thoughts of Mao Zedong, Nkrumah, Lenin, Marx, and the achievements of men like Che Guevara, Zop, and Uncle Ho. Some people are going to get killed out of this situation that is growing. That is not a warning, or wishful thinking. I see it as an unavoidable consequence of placing and leaving control of our lives in the hands of men like Reagan. These prisons have always borne a certain resemblance to Dachau and Buchenwald, places for the bad niggers, Mexicans, and poor whites. But the last 10 years have brought an increase in the percentage of blacks for crimes that can clearly be traced to political economic causes. There are still some blacks here who consider themselves criminals, but not many. Believe me, my friend, with the time and incentive that these brothers have to read, study, and think, you will find no class or category more aware, more embittered, desperate, or dedicated to the ultimate remedy, revolution. The most dedicated, the best of our kind, you'll find them in the Folsoms, San Quentins, and Soledads. They live like there was no tomorrow. And for most of them there isn't. Somewhere along the line they sense this. Life on the installment plan, 3 years of prison, 3 months on parole, then back to start all over again, sometimes in the same cell. Parole officers have sent brothers back to the joint for selling newspapers, the Black Panther paper. Their official reason is failure to maintain gainful employment, etc. Were something like 40 to 42% of the prison population. Perhaps more, since I'm relying on material published by the media. The leadership of the black prison population now definitely identifies with Huey, Bobby, Angela, Eldridge, and anti-fascism. The savage repression of blacks, which can be estimated by reading the obituary columns of the nation's dailies, Fred Hampton, etc., has not failed to register on the black inmates. The holds are fast being broken. Men who read Lenin, Fanon, and Che don't riot, they mass, they rage, they dig graves. When John Clutchett was first accused of this murder, he was proud, conscious, aware of his own worth, but uncommitted to any specific remedial action. Review the process that they are sending this beautiful brother through now. It comes at the end of a long train of similar incidents in his prison life. Add to this all of the things he has witnessed happening to others of our group here. Comrade Fleeta spent 11 months here in O-Wing for possessing photography taken from a newsweekly. It is such things that explain why California prisons produce more than their share of Bunchy Carters and Eldridge Cleavers. Faye, there are only 2 types of blacks ever released from these places, the Carters and the broken men. The broken men are so damaged that they will never again be suitable members of any sort of social unit. Everything that was still good when they entered the joint, anything inside of them that may have escaped the ruinous effects of black colonial existence, anything that may have been redeemable when they first entered the joint, is gone when they leave. This camp brings out the very best in brothers or destroys them entirely. But none are unaffected. None who leave here are normal. If I leave here alive, I'll leave nothing behind. They'll never count me among the broken men, but I can't say that I am normal either. I've been hungry too long. I've gotten angry too often. I've been lied to and insulted too many times. They've pushed me over the line from which there can be no retreat. I know that they will not be satisfied until they've pushed me out of this existence altogether. I've been the victim of so many racist attacks that I could never relax again. My reflexes will never be normal again. I'm like a dog that has gone through the K-9 process. This is not the first attempt the institution, camp, has made to murder me. It is the most determined attempt, but not the first. I look into myself at the close of every one of these pre-trial days for any changes that may have taken place. I can still smile now, after 10 years of blocking knife thrusts and pick handles, of anticipating and faceless sadistic pigs, reacting for 10 years, 7 of them in solitary. I can still smile sometimes, but by the time this thing is over I may not be a nice person. And I just lit my 77th cigarette of this 21-hour day. I'm going to lay down for 2 or 3 hours, perhaps I'll sleep, seize the time.